G'day legends, I hope you are having a fantastic day and so far you are having a brilliant week. Now, as I recover, you're just going to have to deal with my voice coming in and out throughout the video, but thank you for all of your messages of support following my yesterday's comeback video. Now legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over and I'm actually going to issue you some homework today as well to go away to look at so we can refer to it in the future without complete explanations behind it. And we know we do this with a little bit of books. So we're going to talk about gold as well as a podcast to go and listen to. We're going to talk about an upgrade to, of course, the FAB, the glide bombs and those extending range and the difficulties that that brings in. It's not just the ability to target at extended range. It's the ability to not be able to target the aircraft and cities that are now within range of a much, much cheaper, simpler weapon system than something like a cruise or ballistic missile. Of course, we'll be having a look at the maps. I want to look over these proposals of ceasefire, this new 12-point ceasefire peace plan. We had the 5-point victory plan, the 10-point peace plan. We've got 12 points at this. Again, let's go over that because there's just some delusion in that. But one thing I do want to talk about, as you know, I'm catching up on a few days, is one of the most senior Brits, former commando, has spoken about the reality of this war. And that is actually very, very rare to hear, especially out of the UK, of all places. And then we're going to talk about oil a little bit and some just mystery explosions that have happened in both Hungary and Romania and how the deal or the meeting between Putin and Trump in Hungary is off after Rubio, Lavrov had a bit of a falling out on the phone. So let's start into this and we'll go over a lot. Now, I was just randomly scrolling through YouTube yesterday because I think I've watched every TikTok and YouTube over the past week because I haven't been well enough to do anything else. And this is an Australian precious metal company, ABC Bullion. They sell a heap of silver and gold, whatever. Of course, gold is skyrocketing over the past few months. Now, this is a small YouTube channel, and of course, they just trade precious metals. But they have this video here with this Jim Rickards. Now, go and listen to this. Now, this has nothing to do with speaking about the war in Ukraine, the war of course, that we're seeing in Europe at the moment, although he does touch on it. He's just speaking about gold and precious metals and how there's de-dollarizing away from the USD and how China are purchasing a massive amount of gold. Russia almost building this gold Silk Road as well, the ability to loan cash, fiat cash against then gold and how that can massively change things into the future. Please go and watch that as well as, although it's a little bit more YouTube-y, this massive YouTuber here, Mr. Andre G, I'm guessing, China's using gold to replace the US dollar. It's a fair bit more YouTube-y than this one from ABC Bullion, but please go and watch both of those together. That is super, super interesting when we align that, especially with some of the points around US, what's underwriting the USD, and of course, what then some in the Kremlin have said about the US looking for a crypto correction in, of course, limited assets. Of course, gold is one of them. Bitcoin may be another of them. Go and have a look. That's the homework that I'm issuing you. On the second part of this is this great interview here by a YouTuber, Glenn Dyson, of Jennifer Kavanagh. Now, this is one of the best interviews I've seen. She's just got back from Ukraine and giving her perspective on war and peace, but also how what is being told through the media, through politicians, even within Kyiv itself, is a reality built on false hopes and false information. And that we need to sort of come back down to earth and actually view what the reality of the battlefield is, what the reality of security guarantees is, and how we have to be open to far more than what we are seeing. And this is going to relate to what I speak about later on in this when I speak about that ceasefire delusion that we are seeing. So let's have a look at these upgraded FABs. Of course, the FAB is a catastrophically destructive weapon that we are seeing on the battlefield. There's been peaks and troughs of them, but overall, these from 250 kilograms up to 3,000 have been causing massive chaos and are used in that layering system of holding Ukrainian soldiers in place with drones, and then the destruction with a large ammunition such as an FAB. Go on my homepage of my channel, if you just click on it, and there's a video on how that is being done. Now, there's been rumoured about these having a small engine on them to propel them a little bit further. Now, we get further confirmation of this today. Sorry, I had to cough my lungs up. Fighter bomber, he has said, well, yes, the long-awaited and inevitable UMPC with an engine was indeed created by our Twilight geniuses and is already being used against the Ukrainians, but so far only by specially trained people. It has a different name, but the essence is the same. Now, it will be put into production and things will heat up. As soon as the first photos appear online, I will definitely tell you about it. And then from another page here, we have Aviar Hub 34 sharing this image that we see here. Since the enemy showed the demining of our new toys, now we can post them. This FAB UMPK flies 100 plus kilometres, and the same one, but with an engine, covers a record 200 kilometres. Why aren't you laughing now, guys? Not funny. And this brings a lot of problems into the battlefield, the extended ranges of these. And then we have a Ukrainian source here, of course, the deputy head of the Ministry of Defence, GUR, Vadim Skibitsky. He has spoken about this. Titled Skibitsky about the Grom 1, Grom 2, Russia has put bombs within a range of 200 kilometres into immediate production. And not only this on the front line and being able to have those fighter aircraft back further, but then that layering of strategic level strikes that we have seen between Geran, Iskander, KH-101s, but then it relieves then the medium range missile production. Now, I'm not going to say that Russia would reduce their medium range production at all, but it means you've got a system that can somewhat backfill that. So you can create more on the back end, use it for higher end targets, but as well, this will further strain logistics at the very front line. The Russian Federation has stepped up work to increase the number of aerial bombs, and it's introducing new unified control modules. It's currently using in combat tests aerial bombs with new control module. These modules significantly increase combat range. It is expected to be 150 to 200 kilometres during the latest test. The bomb reached a distance of 193, so close enough to 200. These have new characteristics, increased resistance to electronic warfare systems, technical solutions that allow strikes to be delivered at a greater distance. According to him, Russian enterprise are already starting mass production of such complexes, and compared to other systems, these are still very, very simple. So let's have a look at some of the issues with this. Of course, we have the capital, Kyiv, on this slide right here. From the closest point, about 200, maybe 210 kilometres from then Russian territory, of course, Belarus, much, much closer. But what this does is it gives the ability to target infrastructure with a significantly cheaper, significantly more simple, so therefore more numerous weapon systems. But it also puts the bombers well outside of the range of air defence to drop FABs. Now, in the turn of a Su-34, there may be a very small window of which it may be in the targetable envelope for a Patriot system. That said, it would be within seconds if it ever does enter. We calculated dropping at 40 kilometres of these systems. Su-34 is only within range at absolute best for 90 seconds. On simple calculations, and of course this is much, much further away. But this is not just going to be used, of course, on cities and infrastructure. You'll see other areas then, Zap, Dnipro, Kharkiv. We have seen FABs being dropped in Kharkiv as well as Zap, and then further out as well, that more of these can come into range, giving relief on those systems. Therefore, you'll see further destruction of elements further away with things like Iskanders, as we do know those are having a greater effect. So let's have then a look on the maps. Of course, here is Ukraine in the centre of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupy since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, this map today has not updated, but we do have a lot to go over. Firstly, let's start up in the north. Let's start in Volchansk. Of course, we've seen a little bit of movement on this map here, but a lot of movement on the Suryak maps. So let's have a look here. During the last 4 days, Russian army managed to consolidate its positions in the northern part of Snelnikove with the capture of the wood factory. But of course, he showed movement across then the, what river is it up here? The Volcha River crossing as well, and both in the east and the west. But I do have a geolocation to confirm this movement today. So we see this is a Russian soldier right here. He throws a mine and explodes this building, something we commonly see a lot of the time using anti-tank mines rigged up. We see this very commonly now, and this is geolocated about 3 kilometres behind the front line, right near this intersection here. So this lines up fairly closely, almost directly, I guess, with Suriak's map. So we can confirm definite presence. Grey zone there as far as red doesn't meet our threshold, but we do have a pretty high threshold for this. So let's move across into into Kupiansk. I was reading off my bloody slide. Now, of course, what we are seeing at the moment is fairly relatively, people I don't think understand the word relatively, but fairly relative increase its speed into Kupiansk and Pokrovsk over the past days. And these are large, important hub areas. You can just see where these prongs, and this, of course, this map gives us the absolute best case scenario of how it's looking. And it's right into the center of Kupiansk. Now, today we have another Suriak map. On the northeastern front, Russian army continued advancing at the western part of Kupiansk and captured new positions, included the Motor Transport College and Mitiz plant. So you could see basically along under to this road along here, and this creates a lot of problems on the northeastern part of this city that is split in two by the Oskil River. And we've spoken a lot over the past month or so, the targeting from FABs, from Gerans, and from missiles of the bridges that cross the Oskil down in here. And you and I spoke minimum of 6 months ago about the vertical envelopment of something like this, and how the heavy equipment that is left on this remaining side could be very difficult to take back across. Keep an eye on Kupiansk. A lot of Kupiansk is coming under control. We have a similar situation happening down in Pokrovsk. It's just not as clear, but we'll get there as we work our way down. Of course, then we come to the Liman Yampil front line of, well, we somewhat call this the Seversk, the Terny. You get the idea of how this is looking, but we have Stavke sitting in here. You would have heard me talk about this before. Of course, this map shows this a long way off. According to Suriak, following the capture of the trench systems north, Russian army began the assault on the locality of Stavke. And we have heard before this movement in this direction. So if Suriak is correct, this is some, say, 3 kilometres behind the line of the closest point, moving onto Stavke. And you can see where this does have multiple roads joining up, of course, with this cross intersection, but how Russia is building, especially with this grey zone, out to Liman. And we may see this whole area close up at some point. And in my opinion, if we were to see this area close up like this, we may then see this close up here, and that this would be a significant shift. Now, this is what I've said, is the goal in attritional warfare has nothing to do, not nothing to do, but it's not a primary objective to create, is to gain kilometre squares. That's a byproduct of the attrition. And if this attrition moves down into these areas, then as a byproduct of it, you'll start gaining a lot of kilometre squares. And this is where you could see months of nothing, even negative, and then you may see very large months. When that comes, we don't know. It's very hard to predict. Now, let's move our way down. Konstantinivka front line, Katanivka, this pocket, this triple pocket that we have seen actually occurring down in here from the south of Chasiv Yar, Katanivka, and Konstantinivka itself. Something we don't hear about that much, but we'll definitely keep an eye on this. How Suriak has shown that this has been closed up. Russian army captured Nelepivka and entered the center of Pleshkivka. Clashes with Ukrainian army continue. So into Pleshkivka, that there's movement into here. Again, what we did hear from Mr. Playfra is he said that fog that allowed the Russians on the Velika Novosilka front to take some areas, that actually allowed some of the Ukrainian forces stuck down in Kaliningrad, Katanivka, to actually exfil across this waterway. Again, he's the only one I've seen make that claim, so maybe keep just that on ice for a minute. We'll see how that closes up. Now, we have, of course, Pokrovsk. Now, we have the northern sector. The northern sector, for well over a month, has been very, very difficult to get an idea of how this looks at all. So let's have a look on the Suriak map and see what he is showing. So the situation on this front, the Russian army recaptured most of the locality of Volodymyr. Meanwhile, clashes with the Ukrainian army continue in the western part of Shakhovka. So in Volodymyr, the Russians have captured some areas in here, recapturing some of this. And on the Shakhovka area, then clashes are continuing as well. We know that there's like this envelopment / cutoff. It's hard. Again, this shows maybe the outline of how this is looking. Most other mappers show it more similar to this. Ukraine hasn't had the ability to exploit that Russian push through that could have been catastrophic on that cut-off yet. And as well, into this gaining Sofivka and this push into Druzhkovka that could happen as well. Let's come down then into Pokrovsk, Minograd, see how this is looking. On this front, during the last 4 days, Russian army took control of the village of Promen and entered the town of Minograd from the second axis along the road T0511. So let's have a look where this road comes up into Minograd. So we have Promen, this is the road heading down in here, moving into Minograd, and there's a lot of sources today saying that Pokrovsk, that was already critical, it's been critical for a long time, that this is currently falling apart, and there is some level of people saying we need to exfil now if we can at all. But this is the problem with pockets like this, is yes, you're retreating inside the pocket, but the withdrawal can be catastrophic as well. You need to have a good opportunity to pull out. And it'd be very interesting to see if we had like a day of really bad fog again, what we may see. But we do know from history, and if you're not looking at history, you're making shit up, that Ukraine does have from all major areas that are strategically important, is once they become non-strategically important, apparently, that there's still a policy of a no step back. And we've seen this from Bakhmut to Velika to Ugledar to Avdiivka, that this no step back is massively increasing that attrition. And that's why we see, once that falls, a step further until it reaches, and eventually there won't be something to stop that free fall. Now, end of the maps. Let's have a look at what is being proposed, what Europe is presenting, what Trump is saying, what a lot are looking at here. Now, this is rare to see. It's as rare as hen's teeth. But this gentleman here, Lord Richards, who was promoted to the UK's most senior 5-star rank earlier this year and led NATO forces during their troop surge in Afghanistan, he has said Ukraine's allies have failed Kyiv. And as he led the troop surge in Afghanistan, one thing that Lord Richards knows is about losing wars and recovering that as well. Okay? And he's had some pretty brutal, honest words about this. That Ukraine cannot win this war with Russia and should negotiate peace terms with the Kremlin. Back to the interview I showed you at the beginning, she explains that very well. Field Marshal Lord Richards said Kyiv will not be able to drive Vladimir Putin's soldiers out of Ukraine without the help of NATO forces, who won't get involved on the ground. Saying, what we have done in the case of Ukraine is encouraging Ukraine to fight, but not given them the means to win. She spoke well about that too. And based on this false bullshit that we are bringing up, it's still this idea of just a day more, we will win, when it's actually getting further and further and further away. Every day that passes at the moment, even seizing on the current battle lines, is actually getting worse. You're getting less cards in your hand. Reflecting on Ukraine's chances of success against Russia, he said, my view is that they would not win, could not win, even with the right resources. They asked, they could not win even with the right resources? No. They pressed further and said, well, even with the right resources that they couldn't win? He goes, no, they haven't got the manpower. And this guy, he knows what he's on about. Now, knows a lot more than the accounts you may see online here. But, of course, some of these that do know better, there's too much pressure on them politically, in the media, all this to actually speak out against it. You should see the conversations I have behind the scenes compared to some people who may be public-facing or advising that they have behind closed doors or publicly. Now, in my opinion, the ceasefire being proposed, this is just to try and press the pause button. It has nothing to do with ending the war. Try and press pause, rush as much equipment into Ukraine, a European force, so totally not a NATO peacekeeping force, rush as much of that into Ukraine as possible. So if there is a restart, there's more deterrence of that. Because if there's never going to be any recognition of land and that land's going to come back at some point, well, it's going to have to be done militarily. Again, this is why we see the West pushing the word ceasefire so much more than negotiation. That there is this want to use as a proxy to continue pushing on this war. And we see this. This is from the UK Prime Minister, joint statement of Ukraine, by UK, by Macron, by Mers, by the usual people. Now, we strongly support Trump's position that fighting should stop immediately and the current line of contact should be the starting point. We remain committed to the principle that international borders must not be changed by force. Therefore, we are clear that Ukraine must be in the strongest possible position before, during and after ceasefires. We must ramp up the pressure on Russia's economy and defence industry until Putin is ready to make peace. We're developing measures to use the full value of Russia's immobilised sovereign assets so that Ukraine has the resources it needs. Now, there's a lot to take out of this. Firstly, I love when Europeans speak about not changing borders by force, especially the UK or France. That's humorous when we look at history, but okay, we look at that. And then further on, that we must use then the immobilised sovereign assets, we must put Ukraine in the strongest position, pressure on the economy. So what you're asking or saying is effectively, we know that you're winning, that time is on your side, and every day you're gaining more territory, but you must then give us our time so we can then improve our position against you. I don't think people know what the term diplomacy or negotiation or compromise actually uses when you're not starting at equal points. You have a differential in this. Now, the level of delusion that these people are living in, it scares me because I'm like, are you serious? You're the world leaders? But I guess it makes sense when you see how well the UK is doing, and it's got such a bright, vibrant, safe future ahead of itself. So I guess looking externally at this point makes complete sense. Let's go further in on this. This is from Bloomberg. Europe and Ukraine prepare 12-point proposal to end Russia's war. With the 10-point peace plan, 5-point victory plan, this will suffer the same fate. European nations are working with Ukraine on this proposal along current battle lines. And again, I say, if you have an advancing force, why would they be enticed by the current battle lines? If Ukraine was making ground, if in the end of 22, the mid-23, if we suggested a freeze on current battle lines, people would tell you you're an idiot. And I'm telling these people that they're idiots. Once Russia follows Ukraine in agreeing to a ceasefire and both sides commit to halting territorial advances, the proposal envisage the return of all deported children, the exchange of prisoners, Ukraine would receive security guarantees, funds to repair war damage, and a pathway to rapidly join the European Union. So funds from that frozen money. That's why it's important to go and look at that gold video I spoke about in the beginning, because he speaks about, although you've got this frozen money, Russia bought gold absolutely on bulk, and due to the instability in the world at the moment, that gold has made so much bloody money, and that gold that China is looking to have then issue cash for gold will have loans for other nations is a true way to de-dollarize away. He explains that fantastically. Again, it's a lot I said on the previous slide. We're asking you, the side with the upper hand at the moment, to make all these considerations. We're not willing to do any. It's carrot or the stick, and what you're offering is realistically, I don't see what their tactic on this is. Sanctions on Russia that would gradually be lifted through some $300 billion in frozen central bank reserves would only be returned once Moscow agrees to contribute toward Ukraine's post-war reconstruction. The restrictions would snap back if Russia attacked its neighbour again. So, look at this. Sanctions on Russia will gradually be lifted. Trump has looked at lifting sanctions for ceasefire. And Putin said no. We went over that yesterday, I believe. $300 billion that would be frozen, sent back. Firstly, touching that as that gentleman goes over, and he's not speaking about war, he's speaking about gold and money, how catastrophic freezing and stealing that has been, how it's sped up movement away from these currencies, and how catastrophic it would be if then it was taken. But it's not like some of this is going to be used to reconstruct Ukraine. The figures of over $1 trillion are thrown around, which makes sense. If you look at how much it costs to construct a road in Europe, then yeah, 300 billion is a drop in the ocean. Therefore, you're going to want to take all of that asset. Further, moving all these nations away from then what we see as money being put into these other currencies. Moscow and Kyiv would enter into negotiations on the governance of occupied territories. Neither Europe nor Ukraine would legally recognise any occupied lands as Russian. Again, what I said about European states have no history, thankfully, of taking any land by force. As I sit here as a white Australian, Russia, not that I feel guilty about it at all, but Russia so far rejected calls to end the fighting along existing lines, despite incurring massive casualties in the war, now in its 4th year. And again, remember, you only gain casualties if you're the side with the upper hand in manpower, artillery, drones, and you're the ones then enveloping too. You're the one taking mass cas in this and not having to drag guys off the street. So eventually it's going to swing back in your side. But we see that it's not rejecting calls to end fighting, it's wanting to start a negotiation, not a ceasefire. But as I went over earlier, there's a reason why Europe is interested in a ceasefire, because that doesn't lead to an end. A negotiation leads to an end. And they know, they're not dumb enough to not know, that a negotiation does take into account the current battlefield positions of the states. That's not just physical positions, it's upper hands. And they don't want to come to the reality of that at the moment because they know how it looks. Details of the plan are being finalised and could still change. The people cautioned, asking not to be identified, discussing private deliberations. Any proposal would need buy-in from Washington. And what I think we see more and more is Washington, they're fucking done with the fuck around here and no one wanting to be involved in this. They've got bigger problems, way bigger problems as far as China, their own currency, their own issues at home. And I seriously think we've started to see the US just pulling away, and Russia knows that too. During the discussions, Trump forcefully urged Zelensky to quickly accept a deal and emphasise Russia's strength. According to People, US officials who were present floated the possibility of Ukraine making territorial concessions to enable an agreement. Of course, gets massively shot down, especially by people in Europe like Mr. Tusk. Now, Ukraine's allies have seen no signs of Putin shifting away from his maximalist demands. What I will say, the Donbass is not maximalist. Taking to the Dnieper River, that would be maximalist. Realistically, Russia has shown in the past 2 years that given the time, they will be able to take the Donbass by force and likely their economy will be able to sustain that. Now, is this true up to the Dnieper River? Maybe not. That's maximalist. But has it been realistic that they could probably take the Donbass by force? Yes, I wouldn't actually consider that maximalist at this point in time. Of course, saying it would likely take years to do so at all, potentially. But again, these love to lean into this this linear, constant style of war rather than how war like this actually looks. Trump's meeting with Putin in Hungary, this has been called off. Some have said if it was even real at all. And apparently there was a phone call between Mr. Rubio, Mr. Lavrov, and that had turned sour. When we look at the phone call and gone well, Lavrov is believed to have told Mr. Rubio that Russia would not accept freezing the front line in Ukraine in the tense phone call. And as I say again, if Ukraine was in Russia's positions and this was the demand, you'd also hang up on them. Now, the whole tactic at the moment is to try and get Ukraine into the position that Russia is currently in with those upper hands so you can dictate terms about taking more ground. Things work both ways in the real world. It doesn't mean it's fair. It doesn't mean it's just. But at the end of the day, the war is politics. Last slide. Sorry, my voice is absolutely agony. I can barely breathe. An explosion rocked one of Romania's largest oil refineries. No one knows how it happened, but it is Russian-owned. Explosion occurred at the plant owned by one of the largest oil companies. Now, what I will say is we're going to see a lot more of this. We're going to see a lot more grey zone operations by Russia, by Ukraine, by European states inside of Europe. Absolutely we are. Could this be false flag? Absolutely it could be. Could it be Ukraine then tightening down on energy in Europe? Absolutely it could be. Have we seen that? Well, there was a mysterious explosion on the Nord Stream. We'll talk about that in a sec. Absolutely it could be. At this point in time, if you said one way or the other, I completely see reasoning and rationale for Ukraine to target this, MI6 to target this, or the SVR to target this. I could make a good solid argument for both. Maybe this is why I was away the last week. The explosion was it was followed by a fire. It left a 57-year-old worker in ICU. It was not operating at the time. It was shut down, but of course has started a large fire. Now we see in then Romania at the Lukoil refinery, which is one of Romania's largest plants, is owned by the Russian company Lukoil, that there's been another explosion here. Again, said to be an accident, overpressure in this. But again, this is how you have plausible deniability too, is you pay someone to make a mistake to set something off rather than laying just an explosive, leaving your boot behind on the pipeline under the sea. So it's very hard to get an idea. This is exactly how all those fires, as I've reported from my inside source, have been occurring at military plants around Europe. It's not using agents of the state. It's not doing that at all. It's paying off someone to make a mistake or this or that, to light a fire in a bin or to throw your cigarette in a bin and light a fire that burns under where you're creating or making a part for an F-35. That's how things are done. But this is for, of course, a different incident, but many are pointing at similarities between this. Now, this gentleman, he's the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Hungary. He has replied to Mr. Donald Tusk from Poland saying the Polish court denied extradition to Germany of a Ukrainian national suspected of blowing up Nord Stream 2 and released him from custody. Rightly so. The case is closed. So Polish courts, Germany put out, of course, extradition for arrest for a Ukrainian national suspected of blowing up Nord Stream 2, creating the largest ecological disaster, I believe, ever. They've released him from custody and denied Germany's request. Again, I think we'll see a lot more of this in the future, even when this war ends, about this specific case, especially in Germany with the rise of the right. Not happy about this. And then the Hungarian FM has replied, scandalous. According to Poland, if you don't like infrastructure in Europe, you can blow it up. With this, they gave advance permission for terrorist attacks in Europe. Poland has not only released, but is celebrating a terrorist. This is what European rule of law has come to. And of course, this increases all of these other actions that we are seeing, but also gives further legitimacy and what am I looking for? Not only legitimacy, but effectiveness if there was false flag events too. And countries like Hungary, countries like Slovakia, others, and this movement away and being pushed away from Europe, it'd be very interesting to see the future of these states, and especially as the EU becomes massively militarized and money weaponized everywhere. And this is why gold is being so attractive to people and attractive to states, buying tons and tons and tons of it and moving away since, was it Nixon who stopped the cash for dollars back in the 80s? Very interesting. Please go and have a watch of that. You'll get an idea. Anyway, legends, I hope you're having a fantastic day. Look after yourselves, and I'm going to go back to the couch and crop out the coughs and sputtering I've had in this video. Look after yourself. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.